As of early June 2024, significant developments in the Ukraine war include Ukraine's use of U.S.-supplied HIMARS missiles to strike Russian air defenses, marking an escalation in the conflict. The country has also suffered severe power outages due to Russian attacks on its energy infrastructure, losing 50% of its electricity generation capacity. Internationally, Ukraine is receiving substantial support. The Netherlands is investing 400 million euros in combat vehicles, and the US has announced a $225 million aid package focused on reconstructing Ukraine's power grid. Additionally, Ukraine is progressing towards EU accession talks, having completed necessary reforms. Sources: Al Jazeera, Telegraph, Ukrinform. As of early June 2024, significant developments in the Ukraine war include Ukraine's use of U.S.-supplied HIMARS missiles to strike Russian air defenses, marking an escalation in the conflict. The country has also suffered severe power outages due to Russian attacks on its energy infrastructure, losing 50% of its electricity generation capacity. Internationally, Ukraine is receiving substantial support. The Netherlands is today, June 8, 2024. Several significant events have occurred in the Ukraine war. Ukraine has launched its first attack using U.S.-supplied HIMARS missiles on Russian territory, marking a notable escalation. Additionally, the conflict continues to severely impact global food supplies due to the blockade of Ukrainian grain exports from Black Sea ports, leading to rising food prices worldwide. There are also reports of ongoing Russian shelling, resulting in civilian casualties, and continued international diplomatic efforts to address the situation. 12 source, 6 source.
I don't know why it says that. I heard 12 source and 6 source, but that's funny because the source seems to be Voice of America and Ukrinform. Don't know what's going on there. So we go down here.
Today, June 8th, 2024, there has been a significant development in Ukraine involving the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam, leading to catastrophic flooding. The flooding has severely impacted the Kherson region, displacing thousands of residents and causing extensive damage to homes and infrastructure. Reports indicate that the dam's breach resulted in water levels peaking at 5.6 meters in some areas, submerging entire neighborhoods and causing an environmental disaster with oil pollution in the floodwaters. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has condemned the attack, attributing it to Russian forces, and emphasizing the dire humanitarian and ecological consequences. Evacuations are ongoing, with many residents relying on rescue operations involving boats and other emergency measures. The international community, including NATO and the UN, has expressed concern and is assessing the broader impact of the dam's destruction on global food security, given that Ukraine is a major grain exporter. The situation remains fluid, with continued efforts to provide aid and mitigate the effects of the flooding amidst ongoing conflict in the region. For more detailed updates, you can refer to sources like the BBC, Al Jazeera, and The Atlantic. The destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam has led to significant flooding in the Kherson region, and both Ukraine and Russia are blaming each other for the incident. Ukrainian authorities have accused Russian forces of deliberately destroying the dam to cause widespread devastation and hinder Ukrainian advances. On the other hand, Russian officials claim that Ukrainian forces targeted the dam to disrupt Russian defensive positions. The flooding has caused severe humanitarian and environmental crises, with thousands of people displaced, homes submerged, and significant damage to infrastructure. The international community is closely monitoring the situation, and there are calls for independent investigations to determine the responsible party. For more information and updates, you can refer to sources such as BBC News, Al Jazeera, and The Atlantic, 19 source, 18 source.
I still don't understand why it says that. It's referring to, I assume that it has mined information from YouTube videos. The Atlantic, I assume The Atlantic is a newspaper, and Nature, God knows what Nature is. Maybe it's gone out into the wilderness to discover the truth.
The conflict between Ukraine and Russia has deep roots, stemming from historical, political, and territorial disputes. Here are the key reasons for the ongoing war. 1. Historical context. Ukraine and Russia share a long history, with Ukraine being part of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union until its dissolution in 1991. Ukraine's independence was followed by a period of political and economic turmoil, during which it sought to establish its own national identity and political alliances separate from Russia. 2. 2014 Crimea annexation and Donbass conflict. The current conflict began in earnest in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea following a disputed referendum. This move was widely condemned by the international community. Concurrently, pro-Russian separatists, with alleged support from Russia, took control of parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in eastern Ukraine, leading to an ongoing war that has resulted in thousands of deaths and displaced persons. 12 source. 19 source.
Voice of
3.
America,
Geopolitical
YouTube.
tensions. Ukraine's efforts to strengthen ties with the West, particularly its pursuit of membership in the European Union and NATO, have been major points of contention. Russia perceives these moves as threats to its sphere of influence and national security. NATO's expansion eastward has been a consistent source of friction between Russia and Western countries. Number 4. Cultural and linguistic divides. Ukraine is divided culturally and linguistically, with the western part of the country leaning more towards Europe and the eastern part having stronger historical and cultural ties to Russia. This division has been exploited in the conflict, with narratives of protecting ethnic Russians and Russian speakers used by Moscow to justify its actions. 5. Resource and strategic interests. The region is economically significant, with valuable resources and strategic military importance. Control over Ukraine's Black Sea ports and energy resources has also played a role in the conflict dynamics. 20 source.
Voice of
6.
America,
Current
The
invasion.
Atlantic.
The war escalated dramatically in February 2022 when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This invasion was justified by Russia on the grounds of demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine, claims widely dismissed as unfounded by Ukraine and the international community. The invasion has led to significant destruction, a humanitarian crisis, and broad international condemnation and sanctions against Russia. These factors combined create a complex and volatile situation that has led to the ongoing war, with both sides entrenched in their positions and the conflict showing no signs of a quick resolution. 19 source, 20 source, 18 source.
YouTube, The Atlantic, Nature. That's funny. Oh dear, am I. This is where we get into possibly repeating stuff.
The conflict between Ukraine and Russia is rooted in a complex interplay of historical, political, and geopolitical factors. 1. Historical context. Ukraine and Russia have shared histories, especially during the period when Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 allowed Ukraine to become an independent nation. But this independence has been marked by periods of political and economic instability, and tension with Russia over its national identity and foreign policy directions. 12 source, 18 source.
Voice of America,
2. 2014
Nature.
events. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, a move that was widely condemned by the international community. This action followed Ukraine's Euromaidan protests and the ousting of a pro-Russian president, which led to a surge in pro-Russian separatism in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. This resulted in an armed conflict that has continued to this day. 18 source, 19 source. 3.
Nature,
Geopolitical
YouTube.
tensions. Ukraine's aspirations to join the European Union and NATO have been major points of contention. Russia views these moves as encroachments on its sphere of influence and potential threats to its national security. This is exacerbated by NATO's eastward expansion, which Russia perceives as a direct threat. 19 source.
YouTube.
4. Cultural and linguistic divides. There are significant cultural and linguistic divides within Ukraine. The western regions generally favor closer ties with Europe, while the eastern regions have stronger historical and cultural connections to Russia. These internal divisions have been manipulated by various political actors to fuel the conflict. 19 source.
YouTube.
5. Resource and strategic interests. Ukraine holds significant economic and strategic importance, including valuable agricultural land, energy resources, and strategic military locations. Control over these resources and strategic points is a significant factor in the conflict. 20 source.
The
6.
Atlantic.
Full-scale invasion in 2022. In February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, citing the need to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. These claims have been widely dismissed as baseless by Ukraine and the international community. The invasion has resulted in widespread destruction, a humanitarian crisis, and severe international sanctions against Russia. 12 source, 20 back source.
Voice of America. The
These
Atlantic.
elements combined create a complex and protracted conflict that continues to evolve, with both sides entrenched in their positions and the international community heavily involved in efforts to mediate and provide humanitarian aid.
Oh my God. Right. When I put 1, I was expecting you to elaborate with more useful detail about the historical context. You seem to have just repeated what was given in the last section. And this could be really boring. Oh God. You want boredom? Oh,
Certainly.
boring.
Here is a more detailed exploration of the historical context that has contributed to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Historical context. Early history. Kievan Rus. The origins of both Ukrainian and Russian statehood can be traced back to the medieval state of Kievan Rus, 9th-13th centuries, which is considered a cultural and political predecessor of modern Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, was the center of this state. Mongol invasion and fragmentation. The Mongol invasion in the 13th century led to the fragmentation of Kievan Rus. While the territories of modern Ukraine eventually came under the control of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and later the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the northeastern parts evolved into the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which laid the foundations for the modern Russian state. Union with Poland and the Cossack era. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Significant parts of Ukraine were integrated into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth from the 14th to the 17th centuries. During this period, Ukrainian territories experienced significant Polish cultural and political influence. Cossack Hetmanate. In the mid-17th century, the Cossacks, a group of semi-military communities living in what is now Ukraine, established a semi-autonomous state known as the Cossack Hetmanate. The Treaty of Pereyaslav in 1654 saw the Cossacks seeking protection from the Russian Tsar, which led to the gradual integration of Ukrainian territories into the Russian Empire. Russian and Soviet rule, Imperial Russia. By the late 18th century, most Ukrainian lands were fully integrated into the Russian Empire, following a series of military campaigns and partitions of Poland. During this period, Ukrainian culture and language were suppressed in favor of Russification policies. Soviet Union. After a brief period of independence following World War I, Ukraine was incorporated into the Soviet Union in 1922. Under Soviet rule, Ukraine suffered greatly, notably during the Holodomor, 1932 to 1933, a man-made famine that resulted in the deaths of millions of Ukrainians. World War II further devastated the region, but it also led to the incorporation of Western Ukrainian territories into the Soviet Union.
Where are we?
Modern independence and tensions. Independence in 1991. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence. The early years of independence were marked by economic struggles and political instability. Orange Revolution. In 2004, the Orange Revolution was a series of protests and political events that took place after a disputed presidential election. The movement favored closer ties with the West and opposed the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych. Euromaidan and 2014 crisis. In 2013 to 2014, the Euromaidan protests erupted in response to President Yanukovych's decision to suspend the signing of an association agreement with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia. These protests led to Yanukovych's ousting. In response, Russia annexed Crimea in March 2014 and supported separatist movements in the eastern Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, leading to an ongoing conflict. Recent developments: full-scale invasion in 2022. In February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, citing various security concerns and historical claims. This has resulted in a large-scale war with significant global implications, including severe economic sanctions on Russia, humanitarian crises, and geopolitical shifts. Geopolitical and cultural factors. Western integration versus Russian influence. Ukraine's efforts to integrate with Western institutions like the EU and NATO have been met with strong opposition from Russia, which views these moves as threats to its sphere of influence. Cultural and linguistic divides. Ukraine is linguistically and culturally diverse, with a predominantly Ukrainian-speaking West and a significant Russian-speaking population in the East and South. These divides have often been leveraged by political actors to influence regional allegiances. This historical backdrop highlights the deep-rooted and multifaceted nature of the conflict, influenced by centuries of shifting borders, cultural ties, and geopolitical interests. For further reading, you can refer to articles and books on Eastern European history and the specific events leading up to the current conflict.
Come on, you great poo. Fuck, I pushed the button. God, it's going to go over 20, isn't it? Oh, maybe. I just want to know what the time is. Oh, it is going to go over 20.
Certainly. Here are some educational questions based on the key points from our discussion.
Got hiccups
Historical context and background. 1. What were the major factors leading to the escalation of the Ukraine-Russia conflict? 2. How did the fall of the Soviet Union contribute to the current Ukraine-Russia tensions? 3. What role did Vladimir Putin's rise to power play in shaping Russia's foreign policy towards Ukraine? Specific events and developments. 4. What was the significance of the 2014 annexation of Crimea by Russia? 5. How has the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia impacted global geopolitics? 6. What were the immediate and long-term responses of New Zealand to the 2022 invasion of Ukraine? International relations and responses. 7. How has New Zealand's foreign policy evolved in response to the Ukraine-Russia conflict? 8. What are the differences between multilateral sanctions and autonomous sanctions, and how has New Zealand utilized them? 9. How has New Zealand balanced its relations with major powers like the United States and China in the context of the Ukraine conflict? Political and economic implications. What are the potential economic impacts on New Zealand from the Ukraine-Russia conflict? 11. How do international sanctions on Russia affect global trade and New Zealand's economy? Humanitarian and legal aspects. 12. What humanitarian aid has New Zealand provided to Ukraine since the conflict began? 13. What legal mechanisms exist internationally to hold Russia accountable for actions in Ukraine, and how does New Zealand support these efforts? Public perception and myths. 14. What are some common myths or urban legends related to Russia and New Zealand, such as the story of Putin living in Karori, and what is their significance? 15. How do public perceptions and media narratives shape understanding of the Ukraine-Russia conflict in New Zealand and globally? Geopolitical impact. What are the broader implications of the Ukraine-Russia conflict for small nations like New Zealand in terms of international diplomacy and security? 17. How does the conflict between Ukraine and Russia illustrate the shifting dynamics of East-West relations in the 21st century? These questions aim to engage an audience by encouraging them to explore the historical context, specific events, international relations, economic implications, humanitarian aspects, and broader geopolitical impacts of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and New Zealand's responses.
Oh, Mother of God. Well, I'll try and find something, whatever.
Describing New Zealand as
Oh my God.
just a pimple on the butt of the globe underestimates its unique contributions and significance. While geographically small and isolated, New Zealand plays a meaningful role in global politics, trade, and environmental conservation. Its reputation for strong governance, a robust democratic system, and a commitment to human rights and international law gives it influence beyond its size. Additionally, New Zealand's cultural contributions, including its indigenous Maori heritage and vibrant art scene, add to its global significance. Every country, regardless of size, can have a profound impact on the world stage.
Oh no. The people are going, what did you say about New Zealand? I'm sticking to my guns.
The idea that Vladimir Putin might have lived in Karori, Wellington, during the 1980s, even if just an urban legend, adds a layer of intrigue and curiosity to New Zealand's connection to global politics. If true, it would be a fascinating footnote in the history of international espionage, highlighting New Zealand's unexpected place in Cold War geopolitics. However, since it's largely speculative, its actual impact on historical events or current relations is minimal, serving more as a conversation piece than a significant political fact.
I pose.
There is a long-standing urban legend suggesting that Vladimir Putin may have lived in the Wellington suburb of Karori during the 1980s. Murray McCully, who served as New Zealand's foreign minister from 2008 to 2017, led the country's foreign policy with a focus on maintaining strong international relations. During his tenure, New Zealand emphasized multilateralism and peacekeeping efforts, advocating for diplomatic solutions in global conflicts. While his direct actions on the Ukraine-Russia conflict are limited due to the timing of his service, New Zealand's recent responses to the conflict have involved condemning Russia's invasion and implementing targeted measures against Russian officials and entities under Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's leadership. 44. Source.
God, it's a bit slow, my God. Are you going to bloody answer all the questions? Because that's cheating.
You're right. It's important that the questions are clear and that the answers can be found within the text we've discussed. Here are simplified and directly relevant questions, ensuring the answers are embedded in our previous conversation. 1. What were the major factors leading to the Ukraine-Russia conflict? 2. How did Vladimir Putin's rise to power influence Russia's actions towards Ukraine? 3. What was the significance of the 2014 annexation of Crimea by Russia? 4. How has New Zealand responded to Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine? 5. What are autonomous sanctions, and how has New Zealand utilized them in response to the Ukraine crisis? 6. How has New Zealand balanced its relations with the US and China in the context of the Ukraine conflict? 7. What humanitarian aid has New Zealand provided to Ukraine? 8. What urban legend exists about Vladimir Putin and New Zealand? These questions are designed to ensure that the answers are straight. Murray McCully, who served as New Zealand's foreign minister from 2008 to 2017, led the country's foreign policy with a focus on maintaining strong international relations. During his tenure, New Zealand emphasized multilateralism and peacekeeping efforts, advocating for diplomatic solutions in global conflicts. While his direct actions on the Ukraine-Russia conflict are currently, there is no direct digital address for our ongoing conversation or individual pages within this conversation thread that you can share directly with others. New Zealand's government has reacted to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, particularly since the escalation in 2014, with a series of diplomatic and political actions. Here's an overview of New Zealand's stance and actions over time. Initial responses, 2014 onwards. 1. Condemnation of Crimea annexation. New Zealand condemned Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, aligning with the international community's view that it was a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and international law. New Zealand's foreign minister at the time, Murray McCully, expressed concern and called for respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity.
2.
Support for international sanctions.